So, today we're going to talk about eating. As you just saw from that clip from Master of None, um, we're motivated to eat for different reasons. Maybe we're motivated to eat um, for biological needs, to get energy, or maybe we're just motivated to eat things because it looks like it would be tasty. So, we've talked about general theories of motivation for human behaviors and how drives can satisfy needs, but today we'll talk more specifically about motivations related to eating. So, when we're talking about eating, we're going to think about the drives that are involved. So, hunger drives eating, but generally there are also biological, cognitive, and contextual factors that influence our decisions to eat. Physiological factors can definitely influence our eating habits. So, this might not be the first body part you think of when you think about eating behaviors, but there are specific brain regions that play a large role in our eating behaviors. The hypothalamus, in particular, has many crucial functions in the brain related to homeostasis, such as controlling our thirst, hunger, and sleep. Also, the hypothalamus plays a big role in our eating patterns and our weight as well. So, in humans and animals, damage to the hypothalamus has been associated with alterations in eating patterns and weight. For example, researchers have found that people with tumors in their hypothalamus become obese. However, it can be hard to determine causal relationships sometimes within human research. So, this is where animal research has played a large role in investigating the role and relationship of the hypothalamus with eating. So, in rats, damage to the the ventral or middle hypothalamus leads to extreme hunger or hyperphagia, whereas damage to the lateral or outer hypothalamus has led to inabilities to swallow in rats, has led to weight loss and even death in rats. Um, so it's really clear here that damage to the hypothalamus can lead to some significant alterations in our eating patterns and our weight. The prefrontal cortex is involved with taste cues and indicating whether foods will be rewarding or dangerous, like whether sweet foods are going to be rewarding, or whether foods are bitter and possibly dangerous. So, from an evolutionary perspective, there is incentive to eat sweeter foods because they are associated with safety and nutrition. The limbic system is another brain region that is involved with craving in particular. So we see that there's a lot of activity in the limbic system whenever humans are craving something, such as food. And I just want to highlight again that, like we talked about in the previous modules, the limbic system plays a large role in emotions, reward, and learning. So it kind of makes some sense that there's activity in the limbic system when you're craving a food because that food that you might be craving is associated with a reward or an emotion, perhaps, like a good emotion if you're looking at some food that you really, really like. All right, so hunger signals are regulated by hormones. Hormones are chemicals that are released in and throughout the body to signal messages such as hunger or thirst or a need for sleep, and many more. So, important hormones to know include insulin, ghrelin, and leptin. So, these hormones are generally regulated by the pituitary gland and can be released from different organs. For example, insulin is released from the pancreas, The presence of insulin regulates blood sugar, which motivates eating. Specifically, low blood sugar or glucose leads to hunger and thus leads to or provides motivation to eat. Insulin also directs fat cells to take in and keep glucose, which helps regulate hunger as well. Irregularities in levels in the breakdown of insulin occurs with diabetes. So ghrelin is possibly important to triggering eating. It originates in the stomach, and levels are found to increase before we eat and decrease after eating. Leptin is another hormone that's relevant to hunger. It's specifically involved in regulating fat and travels to the hypothalamus to inhibit eating behaviors. Our habits are also influenced outside of our brain and body. Time and taste are huge factors in eating. As humans, we're conditioned to associate eating with regular meal times. This is dependent on whether food is scarce or not, however. Think about classical conditioning with Pavlov's dogs. So the dogs began salivating when they heard a bell that was previously rung before their meals. Similarly, we may experience hunger when we see a clock turn to 12:30 if that's the time that we're regularly eating lunch. Flavor and variety also motivate eating. Like we talked about before, there are beliefs that as humans we have evolutionary preferences for sweets. So that flavor in particular can motivate our interest in eating sweet foods. And sensory specific satiety is a phenomenon suggesting that we quickly grow tired of any one flavor. So, this might explain why we eat more when there's a variety of food. So, think about holidays or potlucks where there's a variety of food. Do you notice that you eat more than usual at events like this? Um, if so, it might be because there's a variety of food, and so we don't grow quite as tired of eating because we don't get tired of just one flavor and we have a lot of options. In addition to learning, culture also has a strong influence on what animals and humans choose to eat. So, generally, we tend to prefer food that we know and avoid less familiar foods. Take a look at the diagram on the right. The curve suggests that the more times we've been exposed to food, the likelier we're to respond with ingesting the food. So, if we have not been exposed to certain foods, our response is most likely to avoid the food. Whereas if we've been exposed many times, then we're more likely to um, ingest or prefer that food because we're familiar with it. Thinking from an evolutionary perspective, this behavior might have been sort of instilled to avoid dangerous or poisonous foods. Thus, it might be safer or more adaptive to avoid foods that we hadn't been exposed to before. The tendency to avoid unfamiliar food is seen in children as well. When it comes to children eating new foods, they're more likely to eat them if the food is provided by a parent rather than a stranger. That might be something that you've noticed before firsthand when you're around children, or maybe this is an experience that you remember or can resonate with. All right. So, certain areas have local norms for their food or cuisine, and so that can play a role in what you choose to eat or how much you eat. Similarly, religious and cultural values may also guide people towards or away from food. And lastly, food taboos also exist. This may have been an adaptive function when looking at it from an evolutionary lens. as it may have been a way to avoid bacteria and spoiled or dangerous foods. However, there are also historical contexts, influences, xenophobia, racism, and classism that we should also consider as they do have impacts on how we view certain foods or what we eat. So at the bottom of this slide, there's some optional readings relating to the topic of food taboos and cultural influences. And like I said, they're optional, so simply there if you are interested in looking into that topic. And that's everything for this